Rest. Hi, everyone. Marcella, you know who we're waiting for in terms of our guests. So you let me know if everybody's here. We're still waiting for membership for a quorum, although we don't need it for a presentation, but let's see who's able to jump on.
Hi, it looks like our panelists on, and we have Ames and Adam and Aiden. Ana is the person who put this together from Somos, and she is the host. And I see that Mary Louise Romero is on as an attendee. I don't think I can promote her, Ana. So if you can hear me, will you promote her to panelist?
I just promoted her, so she should be logging back on.
Great, thank you.
I'm on.
Marcela, you would know better who stays as an attendee and who's on participants or panelists.
So we included as panelists all committee members and Julie and Valeria. If there's anyone you think we should bring into the panelist room, as if we, I mean, because this is an official committee meeting. We have about 25 folks in our conference room as attendees, and we are providing Spanish interpretation for them. They're Spanish-speaking immigrant families and residents of New Mexico who are attending. We're very excited about that. And then I see that there are a lot of attendees. We will take any cues from you, Councilor Villarreal, or for Councilor Rivera, who I do not see on, to let us know if you would like others to be in this room as is normal for our meetings.
I think well, you're saying most of these folks are in one room listening. Is that what you said?
Oh yeah, so a lot of the folks from Somos are actually in our conference room, and we have an owl and they're listening to it on a big screen and they're getting interpreted for. In addition to the attendees, we have about 13 attendees in the webinar, plus those 25 or so inside that other room.
Okay.
And this, we have this little presentation. It's not little, but this is a regular meeting. So please feel free to start whenever you want to start.
I guess I just want to make sure, like, the folks that are in the attendee room, if they had questions when we open it up at that time, once committee members, if there's questions from the public. I'm assuming you wanted to do that.
Yes, and there's a
Okay.
Q&A section that Anna put. We have closed captioning, we have interpretation for all folks. And if people have questions, they can chat their questions in the Q&A.
Excellent. Great. Okay. Let me see. I'm gonna see if our other co-chair is joining us. Okay, hold on just a minute. Yeah, we're just gonna wait one more minute because Counselor Rivera is he's trying to find, he's in transit, so he should be here shortly. Can someone promote Chris Rivera?
On it.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Excellent. I think let me see. Sure we have everybody that Monica's on. Okay, I think we're good. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Gino Zamora is gonna be late. He had another meeting, so we're gonna get started. Let me change my screen here. Just so folks know, I have no control over the attendees versus panelists. And it's kind of hard to read who's in my screen, who's in attendees. I can see all the panelists on the screen though. So let's see. All right. Councilor Rivera, are you ready to start?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to go ahead and start?
I can do it. Can we have a roll call, please? Is Julian or Valeria?
I'm here. Hi, Chris. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Community Health and Safety Task Force. All right, roll call. Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Councilor Chris Rivera,
Here.
Marcela Diaz,
Here,
Mary Louise Romero,
Here.
Emily Kaltenbach,
here,
Monica Alt,
Here.
and Annie Raskin,
Here.
Bruce Finger,
Here.
and I believe Gino Zamora will be joining us here shortly. So right back to you, co-chairs.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes for April 18th. Any changes, Valeria or Julie? Any changes
No
from the,
changes.
thanks, Julie. Any changes from the committee? Wishes of the committee?
Move to approve.
I second.
Motion for approval of the minutes with a second. Could we have a roll call, please, Valeria?
Absolutely. Thank you. Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Marcela Diaz,
Yes,
Mary Louise Romero,
Yes.
Emily Cottonbach,
Yes.
Monica Alt,
Yes.
Annie Raskin,
Abstain as I wasn't present.
Bruce Finger.
Yes.
You've got approval, co-chairs.
Thank you. Communications from the co-chairs, Councilwoman Villarreal.
I have nothing today. And if I think of something later on, I'll share under the task force matters. Thank you.
All right, so I just wanted to share that Michael Garcia announced that he was running for re-election, so the press has been calling me 2 or 3 times today. So I've decided that I'm not running for re-election. This is my 12th year, and that's a lot of time to be spending there, and I just don't have the energy anymore, and really feel like it's time for new voices and new ideas and new opinions to come in from District 3. So hopefully we have some good candidates running District 3, and miss the people, all of you and all my colleagues, but just wanted to let you all know, because I consider you all my friends. So thanks for that. Communication from Valeria or Julie? Valeria, we'll let you go first.
None at this time. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Chris.
Julie?
I have no updates at this time either.
All right. So we're on to presentations. 4A diversion program learning sessions. We have Adam Mansky, Aiden Allen, and Ames Stenson. I hope I got all the names right. And we'll let you guys take it away with whatever you need to do. If you need to present something, let us know, and we'll make sure you're able to do that.
thank you, Councilor Rivera. I'm going to do just a brief introduction. Marcela Diaz, I'm a part of the task force, as well as the executive director of Somos Un Pueblo Unido. We're a statewide immigrant-based racial and worker justice organization. And so we're sort of co-sponsoring this and have a lot of folks from community as attendees in this webinar. And we've provided interpretation into Spanish. So for folks who want to use that interpretation feature, we have a little globe on the right-hand side. Para los que quieren escuchar esto en español, tenemos interpretación, hay el globito. La mayoría de las personas aquí son de Somos, entonces saben muy bien cómo usar y utilizar la herramienta de interpretación. So we also have attendees. Our mayor is an attendee and listening in, as well as Sophie Andad, who works for the city as a violence prevention specialist. I hope that's your right title, Sophie. If not, you can tell us. We also have Ben Bauer on as an attendee, who is our state's public defender. So thank you all, and Senator Pope from Albuquerque. We're focusing very much, as you all know, on our ability as a city to create alternative approaches and more robust diversion and restorative justice programs. That's what our subcommittee, that is Emily, Mary Louise, Councilor Rivera, me, and Monica. And so we've heard really great presentations in the past. We did a presentation probably, I don't know, more than a year ago, maybe less than a year ago, Mary Louise and I, just on sort of these broader concepts of restorative justice and diversion programs. And so we are this is sort of a continuation of that. We're going to be presenting even more of this information at the next committee meeting, which is 2 weeks from now, as we in hand with our community engagement process and Dr. Gabriel Sanchez and UNM Center for Social Research. We just really want to be able to tie these two things together as we move forward and create our task force recommendations. So I just want to remind folks that about 30 states have restorative justice principles in their statutes and their mission statements. They have funding for it. New Mexico is not one of them. And so we hope that this helps spark not just a conversation in Santa Fe, but really at the state level, because so much of this depends on our court system, our DAs, on state statutes. And so we're excited to have our 3 panelists talking about different aspects of not just diversion, but restorative justice programs and how they are used within diversion projects and programs across the country. And I think Adam might talk about this a little bit, but restorative justice programs are often a part of these diversionary programs, but they're not necessary for diversion programs, although we really do support some of the major principles behind them. So our subcommittee is going to be presenting more in the future, so stay tuned. In the month of May, we have with us today Adam Mansky, who's the former director of criminal justice at the Center for Court Innovation from New York, to kind of give us a broader overview of the work that they've done. He's now at NYU and consults with a lot of states and counties and cities to think through some of their diversion projects. Ames Stenson, who is the Restorative Justice Program Manager for the City of Inglewood Municipal Court, and Aidan Allen, who is the Restorative Justice Program Coordinator from the Longmont Community Justice Partnership. We will talk about some pre-booking diversion projects. And for those of you who participated in and listened into the presentation that Mary Louise and I gave months and months ago, there's so many different kinds. There's pre-booking, post-booking, pre-prosecution diversion projects that DAs run across the country. And so these are all sort of the menu of options that we wanted to expose our community to, as well as this task force. So thank you all. We're going to start with Adam. I do want to also thank Ana Martinez. She is at Somos, and she's sadly got my picture on her face right now, but at some point maybe she'll turn her camera on. She's the one who really helped, there you are, put this together. And so thank you for doing that. And then of course, our organizers, Zulema and Rayos, who are in the other room with, again, 25 folks from Somos and community members who are listening to this in Spanish. So we really appreciate the hard work that they're doing to get folks to participate in the surveys, as well as the focus groups, which are well underway and which are happening through May. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam. I know that we may or may not have, and I think Ana has the slides that she'll be sharing, or maybe you guys will directly, but hopefully you have the ability to share your slides.
Before we start the presentation, can we promote the mayor as a panelist and see if he has anything to say?
Absolutely.
I'll promote him now.
Did you want him to speak? Did you want him to be able to ask questions, or do you want him to say a few words before we start, Councilor Rivera?
Just to see if he wants to say a few words.
I want to say a few words about Councilor Rivera deciding not to run for re-election. For me at least, a very big deal. I understand his instinct and his interest in being a grandpa, but he has served the city so well for so long and has been such a great champion that I don't think an announcement like that in this meeting should go unrecognized, and he should have to own up to the fact that we really appreciate his service. I know it embarrasses him, but if everybody would just, whatever you do to give Councilor Rivera a round of applause, let's do that, because it's a very big deal, y'all. Other than that, I just want to be part of listening into this presentation. I'm very eager to hear what we have to say. Love the heart. Good move.
Thank you, man.
Back to you guys.
Can I say something real quick? if it was not for Council Rivera, I wouldn't have gotten into anything in the Santa Fe government. He opened the door for me and to get into helping the city out. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. Appreciate the kind words, Mayor and Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mayor, for being on. Adam, are you ready to go?
I am armed and ready, and
Excellent.
I am so excited to be here in your offices and homes from my home in Brooklyn, New York. It is the wonders of Zoom, right? Sometimes it drives us crazy, but to be invited to meet with you is just thrilling. And I'd like to thank the mayor and the state senator and the councilors and the Health and Safety Task Force. I'd also like to thank you folks from Somos and community members who are participating and some of the other organizations that are here. So I am really excited to talk about diversion because that's something I've been working on for roughly 25 years. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the kind of work I've done and maybe how my views would inform approaching this in a place like Santa Fe. But first, let's all get on the same page. I think, Marcella, you did a great job of queuing things up, actually, but I'm gonna try to stick to one word, diversion. And when I say diversion, I'm going to be basically referring to the wide range of community-based programming that could include pre-arrest, deflection kind of programs. It could include early diversion by prosecutors. It could include alternatives to incarceration on a range of continuum of severity of cases. And it could include, I think of it also as including alternatives to pretrial detention. And also I include in that restorative justice. And we can talk about it and some of the distinctions. But the one thing I'll say is I can't stand the word diversion because it implies diverting something from the main. And much of my work has been focused on trying to flip the default so that the community-based services become the option of first resort and the traditional responses of fines and fees, confinement and conviction become the option of last resort, or the option for the very, very most serious cases, which actually represent a very small percentage of the cases that come through the criminal justice system. So in fact, the phrase that I think of using is community first. How can we focus our work on the needs of the community? How can we make sure that we're returning people to the community, keeping people in the community, giving them productive, valuable responses that are proportionate and don't lead to the lifetime of harms that the traditional responses can often create. So that's kind of overall context. I now do work with governments, city governments, criminal justice institutions like prosecutors, and so forth to help them supercharge diversion. And so to give one example, I'm working in a county in New York State where we developed a blueprint looking across the range of ways that the system interacts with people, and then developing a blueprint of different options to keep people, well, not to keep people out of system, but to keep people in the community. And now over the last several years, we've been systematically developing programs to achieve that across the continuum of criminal justice engagement. And so in that particular county, that includes prosecutor-led early diversion for people who have been arrested, but on fairly low-level arrest, they're diverted to brief interventions in collaboration with a social services provider. And if they complete that intervention, the prosecutor declines to prosecute the case. They never have to show up. There's no fee associated with it. They never have to show up to court. It's as if nothing happened. We're doing a similar thing for people who are essentially a harm reduction model for people who have been arrested but are charged with drug-related crimes. In this particular county, we're also looking at creating a restorative justice model, and as part of that, we've spoken with folks from Colorado, actually, to learn from them about what they've been doing, but to create a restorative justice model that serves adult criminal population as well as a juvenile population. And now where we're moving is to create a diversion for people charged with illegally with gun possession cases. And in New York, those arrests are treated very seriously, can lead to felonies, don't often lead to prison sentences, but usually a felony conviction. And if someone has a prior history of that, they will lead to prison. But we're looking to create, again, an extensive social services intervention, working with a community-based provider as an alternative to what the traditional response would be. I came to this work from 20 some odd years working at a nonprofit called the Center for Court Innovation. And I joined that organization. I'm a lawyer, but to plan a program called the Red Hook Community Justice Center, which was early and one of the more visible, I guess, community court programs that again adopted this approach of trying to find ways, working only with misdemeanor cases, but identifying ways to keep people out of the system, even if they were going through the court. How could we find more productive outcomes? And from that, where I planned that project and then directed it for a while, I moved to working for the organization as Director of Criminal Justice, where over the course of many years, as I see it, or as I talk about it, we essentially built the infrastructure of diversion for New York City. That includes all 5 boroughs. That includes a range of social service interventions, community-based interventions, as alternative to traditional responses, from low-level offense, from pre-arraignment diversion, up through cases like I talked about, the gun diversion program, but also for other types of serious felony charges. And the organization, the Center for Court Innovation, when I left a couple of years ago, they were and are serving 20,000 justice-involved people a year through these kinds of programs. That organization, now called the Center for Justice Innovation, has a national footprint, and they provide some consultant technical assistance around the country on different things. But I ran all of our New York City programming. I also worked in a city, Newark, New Jersey, where we created a program again that served a continuum of community-based program alternatives to the traditional response. And so again, there are a few challenges with these kinds of programs. One is obviously identifying who the key stakeholders are. And one of the things that I've learned is that prosecutors are very important to this process. So are judges, and of course, defense attorneys. Our system is built around the adversarial system seeking to find factual and legal guilt or innocence through the trial process. But in fact, in the vast majority of cases, that whole system is short-circuited through plea bargaining. And the reality is that essentially a plea bargain is a negotiation between a prosecutor and the defendant to reach a resolution. And when I started working at the Center for Court Innovation, I would characterize the era 25 or more years ago as kind of a tough on crime era. And in that environment, I found that prosecutors really tried to lever up the punishment, even through through plea bargaining. But what I've seen over time, and as a result, much of my work was focused on judges who had, a significant influence, maybe not on the terms of the negotiated plea bargain, but certainly on how they could influence some of the sentencing. And but over time, we've seen, and I don't know what New Mexico's prosecutors or judges are like for sure, but I would say that I've certainly seen a change where many prosecutors, and certainly ones I work with, are eager to find different ways of approaching the populations they serve. They're aware of the issues of racism and bias and socioeconomic injustices that have animated the systems in the past and that can inform how the system operates now. Many of them don't want to criminalize their communities, the communities that they serve, but they're actually kind of stuck in a dilemma often, which is that they have what's essentially a binary option when they have someone in front of them. And that's more or less conviction or nothing, fines and fees or nothing, jail or prison or nothing. And so the way that I've approached diversion, or the way we've approached diversion, is to understand that, even with the interest in not sending everyone to prison, if prosecutors or judges don't have that option, they're going to kind of default to these traditional responses. And so in some ways, creating a network of diversion programs has meant almost like a behavioral economics trick of literally making it easier for system players, and that could include police, of course, as well, to choose these kinds of options instead of using the traditional ones. And all of a sudden, and so the way that we did that when I was at the Center for Court Innovation is we would physically interpose a social services clinic and social workers in the courthouse, in the courtroom. So when the different stakeholders, like the prosecutors, defense, and judges, were trying to figure out, there's someone in front of them, what do they do? We would have a social worker there who would say, well, I've looked at this person and here's a range of non-confinement options, or a way that they can, the way that the system can respond to that person's crime or whatever without necessarily giving them a lifelong conviction, essentially. And so some of it is about the mechanics of creating these kind of systems. And to do that, I'm sure you folks know this, but it really is about building a network of collaboration and looking beyond the traditional stakeholders of the criminal justice system. Obviously, and I'm sure you'll hear about this in a bit from the other panelists, but for us to create, for me to work with, advise a DA and help create a restorative justice program, the DA's office is not going to be the provider of that intervention. They won't have the kind of neutral credibility, and it's just not what their area of expertise is. So, obviously for that kind of program, and for most of these community-based services, it's really creating partnerships with the range of service providers. And I will say that one of the things that I've seen over time, and then I'll give you guys a break from me talking at you, is that once you bring new players into the system, the conversation starts to change. So that, for instance, in New York, prosecutors used to call defendants not by their names, but only defendant, and in that way kind of dehumanize them. And what we've seen is when we have social workers reporting to prosecutors and judges on the progress of Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, all of a sudden you see that the prosecutor begins to see the defendant as a person, as a human. And that has all sorts of powerful benefits. And of course, that's true with judges and other players. The final point I want to raise in thinking about creating diversion programs in a community is that it is absolutely critical to think about proportionality. So at the height of the tough on crime era, when there was no appetite for rehabilitation programs in much of the US, and in fact, even today, people don't really use the word rehabilitation that much in criminal justice. The folks who believed in clinical programming fought essentially for a foothold in this space. And to do that, they had to do two things. They had to show that the response of the social services was robust, that if you're not going to send someone to jail for a year or 2 years, you should have a very intensive social services so that in some ways it's kind of like an equal weight or almost like a similar kind of punishment in the obligation in the minds of, I think really in the minds of prosecutors at that point, and also in the minds of judges and so forth. And that led to the creation of things like problem-solving courts, like drug courts and community courts. Well, not so much community courts, but veterans courts and mental health courts and so forth. But one of the challenges is that really engaged the interest of prosecutors to bring clinical programming in, but in some ways, often that impulse can work against itself. So what we've seen with some problem-solving courts is that the obligations are so intensive that in some ways they're only designed to serve a very small population. And that in fact, many defendants and their lawyers feel the obligation is too intense, and they would prefer to just have their clients serve their time or take their conviction or whatever. In that sense, the defendants are kind of voting with their feet. And I've had many prosecutors say to me, I've created this fantastic diversion program, and it has all sorts of, treatment and all sorts of other benefits, but I don't understand why no one participates in it and why we only have 5, defendants enrolling. And I will look at them and say, well, that's because it's only meant to be dealing with people who stole a candy bar or whatever, that the obligation, that in fact the obligation is so disproportionate from what the offense is. And so one of the things that I've kind of preached in working with different locations is you really need to think about how to make sure that although the person may be high need, you still need to be mindful of what the legal jeopardy is, what the weight of the case is, and you need to match that, because at the end of the day, someone with high needs but arrested on a very low level kind of offense, they may benefit from lots and lots of treatment, like a year of treatment, but at the same time, it's not really a fair response to obligate them to do it. And so thinking about how to match up the needs with what the legal weight is very important. But I know I've taken up a lot of time, so I'm going to stop right now. Yeah.
We appreciate that overview, and that's precisely why we wanted to have some folks from Colorado who really are leading the country in many ways in their broad spectrum of different kinds of diversion and restorative justice program. They have a state legislature and funding that is robustly funding these programs. And so I think we are going to start with Aiden, who does this work in Longmont. Is that right? Colorado. You can, and I don't know if you have slides, Aiden, but are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I don't have any slides.
Oh, okay. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit about your program and because again, it is a great example of a pre-booking program, but you work really closely with law enforcement. Not all diversion programs do and not all RJ programs do, but that's something that you all have doubled down on in Longmont, Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I just want to say thank you guys for having me here. It's definitely an honor to be able to share this with you guys. And yeah, so I work for Longmont Community Justice Partnership. We've been in the Longmont area for 25 years now, providing restorative justice services to the community. And that's changed a lot over the years. Traditionally, we worked with law enforcement on kind of a referral basis. So officers would we'd train them with certain criteria in deciding when cases would be appropriate for restorative justice. And usually that includes when like there's a victim involved that has needs, when whoever was responsible for the offense is already sort of taking accountability, and a few other things. But that can be a little difficult because we got a lot of feedback where even with the training, they didn't always feel totally equipped to make those decisions. They had to make them like really split second. And yeah, just a lot of feedback, and they didn't really like want to necessarily be making those decisions or wanted a little bit of support. So we still provide that for adults. That's how we receive adult referrals for restorative justice programming. And yeah, restorative justice programming looks, we have a few programs, but the main program that we provide to the city is our restorative justice conferencing. So, right, getting a responsible person, whoever committed the offense, together with anyone who was impacted by that. They have support people there, and we try to get members of the community there as well as the officer. And we have trained volunteers who basically prepare them to have a discussion in a circle about what kind of needs to be done from there. It's an opportunity for everyone to talk about how they were affected, what their experience was, and then decide, you know, how accountability needs to be taken, who's responsible for any impacts or harms that were caused. And then we write up a contract with everyone there for the responsible person to kind of take steps to repair those harms and maybe find some healing themselves if they need it. And that contract is legally binding, and it is a pre-file diversion program. So yeah, pre-booking. The officers will give them a referral instead of a ticket. And if they complete their services with us, then their case will be totally closed out and they will never even receive a ticket. So what's also exciting is the way that we provide services to youth has changed in the past year. So last June, we started working with the city on what's called the Rewind program. And this is a program for all youth who interact with law enforcement. All of them have the opportunity to receive services, including restorative justice, instead of a court date, similar to that pre-booking model. And yeah, this program came about because the city of Longmont and probation, they had their own diversion program, and they have had it for many years. That was post-file. And we kind of also provided services to the city, but there was a little bit of a disconnect in kind of the access points for receiving this service. They had an independent contractor come in and kind of evaluate the diversion program, as right, our legislators are encouraging kind of restorative justice across the state, and we wanted to get ahead of the game and kind of decide, right, how we wanted to offer restorative justice before we were kind of told how to provide restorative justice to the community. And So the independent evaluators kind of came in and they said, what you're doing is great. However, I have 2 recommendations. 1, this should be pre-file. And 2, you need to have like 1 access point for all the services that you guys provide. So this was great because for a long time, we wanted to work more closely.
Is it just me that has Aiden frozen?
No,
Sorry, can you hear me?
now we can. You just
Can you hear
popped
me
up.
now? Okay, did you miss it? Should I like?
We missed about 10 seconds.
Oh, 10 seconds. Okay, so yeah, so the recommendations from the evaluators were that our their diversion model should be pre-file and it should all be 1 access point. So they invited us to be folded into that Rewind diversion program, in which we work in partnership with the City of Longmont, probation and the courts, and also Longmont Children, Youth and Families, who run a youth center and provide different services to youth. In creating this sort of like large kind of scope of services and interventions that we can provide any youth who interacts with law enforcement. So this started, it's almost been a year. It's been about 9 months now. And so when law enforcement would normally ticket a youth, they instead give them a date to show up for our orientation. There's a few disqualifiers in there in which if it's a mandatory arrest, that's not eligible. If it's like a sex offense or if it's use of a deadly weapon, it can be like possession of a weapon, but the use of the deadly weapon there is also a disqualifier. They need to be under the age of 18, which hopefully will change. We've been working closely with the chief of the Department of Safety to hopefully get that extended to around like 23 maybe, because we understand that right, our brains don't stop developing at 18. People are still learning, people are still growing, and they should still be afforded the opportunities to learn from their mistakes. And obviously even further past then, but it's much easily marketable when you're talking about youth and we're talking about young people, and that's where we're kind of starting to get in on the ground and expand from there. So as long as you can only do the Rewind program 3 times. So youth have the opportunity to enter this program 3 times, and then we kind of say, you know what, we most likely expended all the different interventions that could be helpful for these youth, and we need to start looking at some other options, and maybe they need some more intensive services. So once they show up to orientation, we explain to them what the program is. They have the opportunity to decide if they want to participate or they'd like to go to the traditional court method. You have people who are just more comfortable with probation, and you have people who don't believe that there's probable cause, so they're gonna fight their case, and we have people who work with them and to make sure that they're making informed decisions when they make those decisions. And once they agree to it, they'll complete an assessment where we kind of ask, it's called the CANS assessment, and we interview them to find out like what's going on in their life, trying to figure out what are some of these root causes that have brought them to offending, whatever that looks like, so that we can target those needs and those strengths that they have with the interventions that we provide to them on the other end. Then we meet, and we are a member of the team that meets along with probation and the people of the youth center to decide what interventions are most appropriate. So we provide the restorative justice interventions. Like I said, we have our community group counseling. We have a restorative theater program that just kind of helps youth figure out what safe accountability can look like. And we also provide like reintegration contracting and restorative conversation skills building to kind of help. So a large spectrum of services, and each of them can really be adapted to fit the needs and the strengths of each kid. That's something we figure is really important, is making sure that our interventions are flexible and responsive to the participants that we work with. Outside of what we provide, the other partners provide substance use education, counseling, family counseling, parenting classes, decision-making skills classes, programs that help youth to get closer to and help them prepare themselves for whatever they want to do post-education, be it the job that they're interested in, college, whatever that is. We have programs that are designed as interventions for individuals who are or are at risk of becoming affiliated with gangs. And we're constantly looking for other partners, right, to bring in to make sure that the services that we are able to provide are robust and can fit into the unique needs of whoever enters in through the program. And yeah, so we don't have a lot of, we're still working on collecting and evaluating our data, and hopefully we'll have that soon to be able to share that out. But some anecdotal things that have been, that I've seen from this program is it's really transformed what it looks like for youth to interact with law enforcement, whatever that is, because I hear people using words like, oh, thank you for the opportunity, and oh, this is so helpful. We have people who were like, okay, we didn't find probable cause in your case, so you don't have to do this program, but you can if you want to. And they're like, oh, I've recently immigrated here, we're new to the community, like we need help like figuring out what the resources and services are needed. Like we're going to do it anyways, which is just so different than kind of traditionally how I view people interacting with law enforcement. Usually like, oof, like not a fun experience, but we see that, yeah, it's just a lot of people describing it as beneficial, both for the youth and for their family, especially with restorative justice and kind of teaching them how to like better handle conflict and accountability with their family system, as well as like the larger community system. But there's kind of like, so getting into some of like the challenges, there's like a double-edged sword to that almost, where it's like when you work with officers and they see that your program is beneficial to youth and they see that youth have a lot of needs. Most of our referrals come from our school resource officers. So they know that youth have a lot of needs, and then they're like trying to get them to our program, and maybe giving them a referral when traditionally it wouldn't be a ticket, it'd be something they would handle on the school level. Which yeah, is just one of those challenges that we're working through, because they only have 3 chances, so we don't want to put them in there if they aren't necessarily completely eligible for that. And yeah, I think hopefully that was a lot. I know it's like,
Thank you.
yeah.
So we are going to have lots of time for questions, and so please, all of our panelists, stay on. We have some time. We're taking up most of the time for our meeting today on this. One of the things that I would say as we move over to our next panelist is that one of the things about Longmont, and hearing your presentation, is that you really did have a very city oriented, because we have to deal with all the jurisdictions, right? And a lot of the work that you were doing was pre-booking. So it was law enforcement, and later we'll ask a little bit about that sort of culture shift and change and how you brought law enforcement into this. But it's, I think, a great example of how you diverted people pre-arrest. And what it sounds like is that people who were young people who were getting arrested were going through this whole other process, and there were problems and challenges with it being post-arrest with probation and juvenile probation and parole. And so I appreciate this example, because you created the culture at the city level within your jurisdiction, right? And then it kind of mushroomed, or it into something bigger post arrest for juvenile probation. And so now that I want us to hear that, because there's so much that we can do at the city level that will help, I think, inspire some of these larger cultural shifts in our community. So we'll be back to you, Aiden, to ask you more questions about that. But here we have our next Colorado program to give us a little more, to give us another example of, I imagine, a post-arrest, post-booking program through your municipal court system. And I think that'll help give us just different ideas of different access points to be able to do these really important interventions. So I'm going to invite Ames to go off mute and take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And yeah, just to echo appreciation for inviting me to participate in the conversation with you all. Huge thanks to Anna for inviting me, and I'm excited to hear and see the work that you all are involved in. I'm actually really excited too that you're talking about this within the context of public health, public community health, and safety. I think that at least in the state of Colorado, that's kind of where our conversations are going through our partnerships and collaborations, is to really look at how do we elevate the use of restorative justice practices specifically within both the not only public safety realm, but the public health realm as well. So I'm Ames Stenson. I use pronouns they, them, theirs. I am the Inglewood Municipal Court Restorative Justice Program Manager. I also wear a couple different hats. I'm the Colorado Coalition for Restorative Justice Practices Board President. That's a 501c6 membership organization for our state for restorative justice and restorative practice practitioners. And then I'm also on the board of an organization called the Restorative Rainbow Alliance, which is a group of LGBTQ+ restorative practitioners looking to elevate and support and create inclusive restorative justice practices via training, via programs, those kinds of things. So really a pleasure to get to be with you and again, be a part of the conversation. There's a lot of things that I won't echo, but I'll kind of name, especially I just want to say, Aiden, I know you and I haven't met officially, but I actually had the privilege of working at the Longmont Community Justice Partnership 10+ years ago. And LCJP, I'll just name, is literally considered one of the kind of pinnacle restorative justice nonprofits, especially in our state, but across the country and even globally. They've really laid the groundwork for how do we do this kind of work at the community level. So I can't say enough good things about LCJP and what they are doing. And honestly, we were informed by the work of LCJP and other programs in building our program. So with that, it sounds like many of you are familiar and kind of know about restorative justice, restorative practices, but I always just like to name and really acknowledge and appreciate that these roots of restorative justice, restorative practices are not new, right? This is not a new way of practicing conflict resolution or community building. These are the oldest forms of conflict resolution that there really are and that they really exist. And so just to name that, it's really important as practitioners that we acknowledge the roots of these practices from Indigenous communities and Aboriginal communities across the world. So that's really an important piece of where and how we come from with this. I also just want to name, as far as kind of context, when I think about kind of what are these terms and how do we use them, I like to say that if you ask 10 different restorative justice practitioners what RJ is, you're going to get 10 slightly different answers, right? And so from the perspective of thinking about, it sounds like you all are really thinking about restorative justice and the use of as it relates to diversion. But I also just want to name and elevate that these concepts, as it sounds like, again, many of you are familiar, are often used on the front end in the preventative, proactive community building work that I think is equally as important. And so this is where you hear about these programs happening in schools, happening with community organizations. So even before a crime has actually been committed, what is the restorative justice, restorative practices work that can happen on the front end in the community building, in the trust building, in the relationship building? So when we're using the values of restorative justice, of those 5 R's of restorative justice, we like to say, of relationship, respect, responsibility, repair, and reintegration, which one of the founders of LCJP coined Beverly title. When we're using those values, we're actually using them pre even an incident or conflict or crime even taking place, right? And so So I named the piece of restorative practices can be both proactive, preventative practices. They can also be responsive and reactive responses. There's also ways we can be the use of informal practices as well as formal practices. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our Inglewood Municipal Court program, which uses restorative justice as a reactive or responsive practice to when a crime actually does occur. So the way that we define restorative justice in our program itself is restorative justice practices are victim-centered, community-based responses to a crime or conflict, which then create opportunities for accountability, repairing harm, and restoring relationships. So when we say that they're victim-centered, similarly to what Aiden mentioned, we always ask a harmed party, do you give consent for the case to come through restorative justice? So their voice is really central. They then have different ways of being able to participate in the program if they would like to. It's community-based because we use a restorative justice model called the community group conferencing model that invites community members to participate in the facilitated conversation of who's been harmed, what needs to be done to repair that harm, and how is it going to be done, right? In creating that accountability contract. And so it's many different voices, all of the folks that have been impacted, including the larger community in those conversations. And then again, similarly to what Aiden was saying, we use that model of coming together for a facilitated conversation to emphasize accountability, where is there opportunities for repairing harm and ultimately restoring those relationships. I will also just say that our program fits really well within our community court. So we are a program that's situated in the Inglewood Municipal Court. Also, just to give you a little context, if you don't know, Inglewood is just south of Denver. We're actually a very small little community, about 35,000 people, believe it or not. We have probably double that come in to work in our community, but as far as who lives here. So we're a pretty small municipality, and our community court is really dedicated to ensuring justice with dignity for all. And one of the goals is to promote rehabilitation and restorative opportunities. And in that, in several of our other goals, our restorative justice program really fits well. And our Judge Jefferson, has been a really important advocate and supporter of creating the program and wanting to see it grow, and really thinks about the use of restorative justice as it relates to system-wide criminal justice or criminal legal reform. So we've definitely had his support in building the process, building our program, I should say. So just to give you a little bit more of kind of our background for context. Let's see. Yeah, I've already talked about our model. Who's a part of that model? Again, pretty similar to what Aiden described as far as how and how we're bringing people into the program. We did, in fact, start these conversations informally in Inglewood, 2018, 2019. And then in 2020, we were able to pull together a collaborative advisory team. So we had folks from courts, including our victim services coordinator, and folks from patrol. We had people from police. We also had people from courts. At the time, we had people from the city. So we had our neighborhood resources coordinator and people from communications. We had folks from our school district participate. And we also had community members of Inglewood participate to say what needs to be done as far as utilizing restorative justice in our community. We had a lot of folks at that moment come together to say, yes, we want this. How do we make it work? And so we had some conversations over the year of 2020, and then ended up starting and actually taking cases in June of 2021. So we're pretty little in and new in the scheme of things, especially in RJ and Colorado. But based on just being able to learn from different programs and things such as LCJP, we've built a program that has some success. So in 2022, I'll just give you a quick snapshot of some data. So in 2022, we had 71 cases referred. We also have 50 volunteers who have said, we want to participate, we want to go through training, how do we be involved? And so these are folks that are participating as community members in our processes, as well as acting as facilitators. We had 62% of the cases that we held involved a harmed party. So again, they have options overall, it's a voluntary process for everyone involved, but a harmed party can choose if they want to participate. They have to give consent. If they give consent, then do they want to participate in person? Do they want to have a surrogate on their behalf, etc.? So 62% of our conferences included a harmed party. And then we have a 97% satisfaction outcome of the RJ conference, and 98% of those participants said that they felt like the responsible party was held accountable for their actions. So again, the data that I actually always go back to LCJP, because even prior to the new program with youth, especially, LCJP has a lot of data to show how this community group conferencing model really works and how successful it is. I still think y'all are probably the standard of recidivism. We're not there yet on measuring, but that's our hope, is to, that's my hope anyway, is to how do we get to the levels of LCJP of, you know, I think it's under like at times 8 or 5%. So it's successful for sure. Our program takes both youth and adult cases. So for youth cases, we are a pre-arraignment program. So the officers are writing a ticket, but then they are recommending the case go through restorative justice. Our city prosecutor takes a look at the ticket. I get to take a look, and ultimately he decides, does this go to RJ or not, which 99% of the time he's sending to RJ. And so it's pre-arraignment for youth. It's post-arraignment. It's considered a deferred prosecution for adults. And so that was one of the conversations that we had, is how do we build in a system so that if someone says, I don't actually want to go through restorative justice, or they reoffend during the time, or they say, yeah, I want to go through restorative justice, but then kind of fall off the radar and we're not able to find them, what does the case go away? What do we do? So in fact, that's how we built it into our system now, is that if the person successfully completes their accountability contract, then the case is closed and the ticket is expunged. But in fact, if they don't, then it goes back to the traditional court process. We're actually in the place right now where we're looking to expand to also create pre-file options. And we're also looking at how can we work with cities that are nearby to us, that we call kind of a tri-city area, to do some collaborative work, so that, you know, we're not recreating the wheel in our smaller municipalities here in South Denver Metro. So I think I'm going to pause there, because I'm sure there's lots of questions. And yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Thank you. We appreciate all 3 of these presentations. And I don't know, I'm in as a panelist, so I don't know if all of our boxes are showing on the webinar, but hopefully Anna can do that for folks as we engage in this conversation. So if any of the attendees want to ask questions, that would be great. I have a lot of questions, but I would love for other members of our committee and task force to engage in this in any way. What the only thing I would like to just sort of preface this with is, you know, Sophie Andar, who's an attendee and works for the city, and I are really trying to do within the next couple of weeks just a landscape analysis of what programs are available. And for those of us who have worked in RJ, like, you know, we saw a lot of money dry up during the Martinez administration, the Susana Martinez administration, for diversion programs. And what happens is it really affected, in my opinion, and we'll have more of this next meeting, but sort of a robust, it affected the supply of practitioners, of programs, of nonprofits that were doing this work. And what I'm hearing from all of these presentations is that there needs to be an infrastructure of services, of practitioners, of facilitators, of and volunteers. And that's something that as we move forward, we have to think about how that grows. So I just throw that out there as something that is, you know, sort of one of the first steps that need to happen in this. So I can choose. I saw Monica's hand up first. So go ahead, Monica.
Thank you, Marcela, and thank you, panelists, for coming and sharing your work with us. I'll just share briefly. So I'm a former public defender, and as far as I'm aware, we have one diversion program in statute. It's called the Pre-Prosecution Diversion Program, and it's post-arrest, post-booking. And And for me personally, I probably had one client go through the PPD program in my entire career as a public defender, in part because it was expensive. So there were a lot of fees that were attributed to this program. There was a lot of other things that had to be paid for, including treatment, and other sort of fees to the district attorney's office, and to the court. I now work for the Fines and Fees Justice Center. And so I appreciated some of the comments about, thinking about fines and fees. And I'm wondering in each of your jurisdictions, how you pay for these diversion programs, and also, is there a cost to participants?
So as we answer that, can we go in the opposite? So if Ames, if you would be willing to start with that, and then we'll go backwards to.
Yeah, you bet. So right now, there's one position that's funded by the city for my position, and then and we're looking to again expand services to kind of a tri-city area so that folks can share funding and things like that, and we'll be more eligible for grants and things. So we're looking at expanding that. But as far as actual fee to the participant, yeah, there is. So for juveniles right now, there's a $75 program fee. And then for adults, there's a $150 program fee. There's no other fees on top of that. If an accountability contract includes something like counseling or something like that, we talk about if that's doable or realistic for the person in the conference itself, so that they're not walking away then thinking they've got to pay a couple $100 for counseling, those kinds of things. So we'll provide resources and support to connect them with free resources if that's what's needed. But everything is upfront as far as there's just a flat program fee, and then whatever is built into the accountability contract, which can include restitution depending on the crime. And so that if that restitution is built into the accountability contract, that's known going into the actual meeting, so that that person can say, even, is this something reasonable that I'm able to pay? And we have had one very successful restitution case with about $2,500 that this person was able to pay off. So yeah, that's what's happening with our program around that.
Aiden, do you have, where are you? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, we receive, so yeah, as a nonprofit, we receive a lot of funding from grants from the city, state, and federal level, but mostly that's city and state, as well as from our donors. A lot of the other interventions also receive funding from the city, such as the youth center. They do all this work outside of being a part of this diversion model too. And their funding all comes from the city as a resource for youth in Longmont in general. And yeah, there's a $75 fee to participate in Rewind. However, they can do community service to instead, if that is a burden, that fee. And also to participate in our community group conferencing is a $125 fee, but we also offer a sliding scale based on their income, if again, that's going to be difficult for them. And we've made sure to use the cost of living like most up to date for Boulder County. So it's pretty easy to get that bumped down significantly just due to the crazy cost of living these days.
I guess I'll just say that I'm not used to fees for this kind of programming. I will just based on my, where I've done my stuff in New York City, people were not charged fees for participating in diversion. I think I could probably articulate some reasons why I think that's the right thing. In New Jersey, the same. And I helped launch a diversion program, a prosecutor-led diversion program in Birmingham, Alabama last year. And the DA there was thrilled because it really was a diversion program, the first diversion program in the state, as far as he knows, that did not charge the participants a fee. Now, that said, you've got to fund the program, and that's obviously working with a range of government funders. And I try to make the case that this is a response that is as central a government function as a prison or jail is, or anything else, or the public defenders or prosecutors. And of course, foundations and other funding sources, or applying to federal, like I've just for the restorative justice program that I'm working on, we've just applied in response to a federal solicitation. But yes, I mean, we try to get the actual diversion program and make sure that the service providers are funded one way or another. Yeah, I'll shut up now.
Can I just say I really appreciate those answers. New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the country. And as a public defender, and then now in this role, I've seen people go to jail to pay off as little as $100. So, what could seem like something really small for some folks is huge for others, and will be a huge barrier to anybody participating in any kind of diversion or restorative justice programming, especially families, people on fixed incomes, all of this. So, to everyone's point about, well, if you have a diversion program, there's really no point if nobody can really utilize it. And we found that a lot as public defenders. The last thing I just want to share, if you'll let me, Marcela, is that I really appreciated you all talking about the severity of the crime meeting the sort of actions in the diversion program or the restorative justice. What I've seen in my career is that it will be a pretty minor crime, but then the sort of sometimes quote unquote restorative part, and I'm not saying this of all programs, I'm just saying what sometimes happens in practice is people are required to do, backflips, over and over for multiple years, right? To the point where I would sort of try and steer people away from that, because there was just so many things people would have to do in order to complete it. And there was always fear that they would then fail after, they would have already been out of custody, already over with the case, had we gone the traditional route. So I'd love to sort of, I don't know if this is a question, I'm so sorry. I hate it when people do this, and now I'm doing it. But, if anybody has any thoughts about how you all have balanced that with your own programs, both with the community and state and other stakeholders and legislators or electeds.
I'm sorry, I'll just answer quickly, but I know other people have questions and other people should answer too. But that is years of working with, particularly again, in the instance I'm most used to, it's the prosecutors who are driving much of the plea bargain negotiation, and it's getting them to understand that they can create a beautiful program, support a beautiful program, but if there's so many obligations that it's impossible for people to succeed, or no one's going to participate in it. And so what we saw was in New York, in my experience, we saw prosecutors start shifting from creating these very intense penalties for failure. Like if you don't complete the program, you end up with a worse sentence than you would have had or whatever, to scaling that down to giving people credit for trying to participate. And just generally, I think that it signaled a bit of a culture shift and understanding that the goal is to get as many people into these programs as possible, but to do that, it has to be proportionate.
Before we move on to Annie, did anyone else, did Ames or Aiden want to reply to that? They're sort of on the ground. Creating these.
I can reply really quick. Yeah, so the most intensive intervention that we provide in Rewind is like a 10-week program. So when you're talking about like a year, multiple years, that's like, astounding to me, because yeah, that seems really incredibly difficult, especially when you're like contrasting it to like what would happen if they had gone the traditional method. But we understand that we have 3 chances with these kids before they hit 18. And so, you know, we're okay with seeing them again and trying again with another intervention if that's what needs to happen. And we also have like case managers. And so when we're looking at like treatment options, it's not, okay, you need to complete a year, you need to complete 2 years of treatment. It's like, okay, let's figure out how to get you treatment that you can afford and get you connected with a therapist that's going to be good for you. And we will trust you to take it from there. Right? If that's truly going to be something that's beneficial to you. And again, like we'll only providing that kind of things when they're saying like, yes, therapy would be awesome. Could you help me get in contact with therapy? And there was something else, but it's okay. I forget.
I'll just jump in and add that the average contract for our program is about 3 months. So mostly people are in and done and complete by about 6 months. So same, we don't try to extend. We want people, we say this too, we want people to be set up for success. So how can we do that and how do we work?
Annie, you're on.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, panelists. This is really exciting to hear about all your programs, and especially with juvenile participants. So it can help prevent kind of pervasive involvement with JJ. And my question really relates to the organizational infrastructure in terms of kind of the genesis of these programs. And it sounds like, Aiden, your program is an independent nonprofit. And I'm not sure if I understood completely, but Ames, it sounds like yours is more embedded in a court. And my question is, do some of these programs, are they, how frequently are they funded or created by the city and the courts themselves rather than an independent nonprofit?
Yeah, you're right, Annie, that our program is within the court right now. I would say, and this is my read, Aiden, if please, I'd love to hear your thoughts too around this. As far as Colorado goes, I mean, we have over 50 different programs, restorative justice programs in our state. I'd say there are a handful, a couple that are within some kind of municipal court, or certainly within district attorney's offices, as far as we can use and actually do use restorative justice in the whole spectrum of the criminal legal system in Colorado. So, but there are a lot of organizations that are more nonprofit and are then collaborators and bridge builders with these system entities. So we haven't found too many other court programs here in Colorado. Adam, I don't know if you're aware of kind of where other programs are situated around this within municipal courts, but I can think of maybe 2 others here in Colorado that are actually based within the court for now. And honestly, that was just kind of a starting point. That was kind of, we had a lot of energy and a lot of people saying, yes, let's do this, and where and how do we, where does it sit right now? And so the initial getting it going and building collaboration and processes and things was to set it in the court for the time being, and then to look at, okay, actually, how do we move it up even further? And then how do we get it out of not just the court, but allow still the opportunity for entry from the court, but also pre-ticket and then community, and how do we do proactive work? So I'd respond there.
And I'll just add that New York is more complicated, but in New Jersey, actually, it was Cory Booker, when he became mayor. He had seen some of the work we had done in New York, and he told his municipal judge, this is a program I want to see, this kind of work, I want to see it in Newark. And so that was a directly city-funded program, but they brought my nonprofit in to actually, provide the core services, the resource coordination, the social work, and then that's kind of expanded out to a whole range of community-based programs beyond the court. But there is this kind of core, it's in the court, it's part of the city, but it is actually, a nonprofit that's providing that function. So.
Yeah, I'll just add that, yeah, like I mentioned before, that our diversion program in the court kind of was created independently, and our restorative justice nonprofit created independently. But as both of those grew, just recognizing the partnerships that are available there, and as we try to be more community based and work together, realized became more and more in partner as the years progressed until where we are now, which is working really closely in tandem. And a lot of that work towards the beginning really happened because we were partnering with the police department so much. Before, we were training resource officers and providing trainings to schools, and we found some just incredible people that are within those police departments and the courts that advocated for the work that we were doing as we were working with them. And having a lot of conversations with the police chief and the chief of the Department of Public Safety on how we can continue to expand that and provide as much to our communities as possible. So just really would emphasize the power of building those partnerships.
Do you have a follow-up, Annie, on that, or should I go to Emily? Go ahead, Emily.
Thanks. Really great presentations. Thank you so much for sharing about your programs. I've been sitting here thinking about how successful these RJ programs can be. And whether there's an opportunity to shift them out of the criminal legal system. I know in some cases, AIMS, yours is embedded in and AIDEN separately, but thinking through what offenses don't even need to be addressed in the criminal legal system to begin with, and whether those conversations are happening in your communities, or Adam, in the communities you're working in, whether there's a movement to, I'll use the word, decriminalize certain quality of life offenses, drug offenses, so that the criminal legal system isn't the gatekeeper to an RJ response. And understanding that in some cases that programming might be appropriate in the criminal legal system. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit either about your thoughts on where we're going with that, and whether we should be putting more energy into shifting away from the criminal legal system in some cases, and what that programming could look like. So that's my question. Then I just want to make a comment off of Monica's around sort of the treatment court model, and how, in my opinion, I think it's goes against sort of an RJ type or core principles of RJ, when especially like in a drug court where people are shamed, or it's a punishment-based response if they don't meet certain criteria. And so it's exciting to sort of think through a different way. Like, I don't know if treatment courts really, in my opinion, are diversionary or restorative, and how we can, again, shift away from this idea of these treatment courts and really center them more in an RJ guided model. So I'll be quiet, but I'm really curious to hear your response.
I'm happy to jump in. I think, Emily, more power to keeping things from getting into the system at all. And it certainly sounds like the city is, well positioned to try and do that. And I think that's great. At the end of the day, though, it is requiring a lot of support from a lot of different partners that you may or may not have as much control over, including police. And so to the extent you can get, for instance, police to divert cases or deflect cases so the arrest isn't happening at all, that's great. To the extent you can intervene at the school level so that, nothing, young people are given an opportunity, I think that's fantastic. But I still assess the problem. At the end of the day, we still have people showing up in court, like police don't know what to do, and they end up, okay, I'm going to divert these 2 cases, but there are these 5 other people that, cross a threshold. I've got to arrest them. And then the prosecutors need to decide what are they going to do. And so to me, I do feel like we're still dealing with a problem. You're right, with criminalization or over criminalization. And if we can find ways to reduce that, it's great, but we still have a problem on our hands, which are people who are presenting into the criminal justice system, whether it's at the point of arrest, at the point of prosecution, at the point of, a decision. And do we decide like that's someone else's problem, or we should have taken care of this earlier? Or do we also figure out how to support the people coming through in that context? And so for me, I feel like there's still a lot of people who are coming through the system. They're probably going to continue coming through the system for some time. And so let's figure out how to make the most meaningful opportunities out of this. As far as treatment courts, I don't entirely agree with you on some of it, but that's okay. But I will say, like in New York, what we've seen is that there's some crimes, some, I would say, drug crimes are being downgraded very frequently. What we've seen are far fewer people who are actually ending up in drug treatment courts in New York. And as a result, again, it's thinking about how defendants voting with their feet or what's there. And so I've been involved in creating a whole bunch of more, I would characterize them as harm reduction models, where people, participate in programming. Hopefully the penalties, again, aren't, it's not about shaming them, but it's about kind of trying to reduce some of the harms. But these are still people who have been arrested. And so how do we deal with that fact? At the same time, if you can advocate for change in legislation, I was also involved in New York, a very low-level criminal charge was public urination. It was a civil, but it wasn't civil. It was a city-based, public urination, public drinking. Lots of people were getting warrants for that, for not paying their criminal fines or showing up to court to do it. And the city was able to convert those into civil matters. So although there was a fine that might have been attached to it, they wouldn't be at risk of getting a warrant and ending up getting arrested by the police for not paying those fines. And then my nonprofit created essentially a diversion for people who didn't have money to pay for that fine, or for people who didn't want to. So, you want to fire on all fronts. I do think that we still have a problem with too many people ending up in jail and prison, or convicted, or having fines that just morph into de facto debtor's prison. And so that's the problem I try to challenge myself with. So that's my answer.
James or Aiden, do you have?
Yeah, I can add as well. So I think we have a long way to go on that. I really appreciate your question, Emily, and agree. One of the things so we work really closely with our school district here, which is quite small. And one of the things that we keep saying is, just because the court has an RJ program doesn't mean we want more cases, right? We would actually love to support you in using restorative practices in the school district before it even comes to the court. And so, that's been a lot of conversation and ongoing conversation, so that we can at least provide data from our program now to say, here's the number of cases we're receiving from each of your schools. What are the options there of utilizing that and using these practices in-house? We'd much rather help use our volunteer pool to come into the schools and do a community group conference there versus have someone get ticketed and come to our court program. So it's a great question. We have a lot of work to do. I would say that similarly on the front of just over criminalizing, homelessness, sitting on sidewalks, those kinds of things. Like our city, like many others, are kind of bumping up against how do we work with folks who are experiencing homelessness and what their needs are. And I would say there's more internal work to be done around, again, the values of restorative justice, restorative practices, What does that look like in some of these crimes versus just continuing to give tickets and then people don't show up and now they have warrants and all the things, which we see quite a bit. So one of the things that I'm hoping as we're kind of looking to transition out of just solely a court program is how could we have conversations with businesses, community, folks from the homeless communities to say, let's have a restorative conversation about that. What are your needs? What would you like? What do you need? Let's hear each other in those proactive conversations before even tickets are given. Let's bring in, officers, let's bring in business owners, et cetera, community members. So I think, bless you, I think that even though that's, not a fix-all or a magic pill, there's a lots of opportunities to build relationships on the front end in that way. I think that would be helpful. So I'm hopeful for that.
Yeah, and I'll echo a couple of things that Ames has said just about there's two ways that we can provide restorative justice, right? Those reactionary ways or that prevention, and partnering with the courts in this way and seeing every youth case that comes in gives us this amazing ability to really target like where the areas for prevention are needed. Like right now we're seeing a lot of violence associated with some shooting deaths that we've seen. So we're beginning to provide healing circles to the community so people can express themselves and we can give resources to parents in those spaces. We're seeing a lot of fight.
Oh no, you're back on frozen.
Train.
Aiden, you're frozen, so we're gonna stop that until you come back in. But I do just I'll take this opportunity because there are a couple of questions that have been answered in the chat, and then we can go back to committee members. And it looks like Aiden is still frozen. But we have a question here from the Somos crew. What happens if one of the parties breaks the accountability contract? Ames, you've already said, you responded. It means we have a check-in conversations to understand what happened and to see if we can move forward with the RJ process, or if the case needs to go back to the traditional court process. We also, this is, I think, important because most of the folks in the other room are parents and Spanish-speaking parents from our community. And it's, how are parents involved in this process? And Ames, you talk about a parent or a guardian needing to participate or at least giving consent for their youth to participate and to have another adult participate with them. That may not always be possible. And so are there ways that you work around that? I mean, not all parents have time. I mean, we know that we have often two jobs because even though we have a $14 minimum wage, it's just not enough. So I don't know if you'd want to expound on that before we go to other questions from our committee.
Sure. So sometimes if the parent or guardian, legally they have to give consent for their kiddo to go through the process. But if they're not able to participate, is there a family member? Is there a grandparent? Is there a teacher? Is there a mentor? Someone that's an adult in their life? Someone that's connected to school that could be their support person? Ultimately, we want to try to bring in someone who is an adult in their life that they have a good relationship with, that they trust, to be a part and with them in the process. So yeah, we can work around that once we get parents to kind of sign off and say, yes, it's okay for my kiddo to go through this process.
And I also think it speaks to this committee and its recommendations and the focus groups and the community engagement that isn't just about these particular interventions when it comes to crime and laws and breaking of rules, but also sort of the broader needs in our community to make us feel safe and thriving. We have some questions just from Sophie. For the programs that enroll youth, could you please elaborate on what constitutes a mandatory arrest? And that's a pretty quick answer. And then she also asks, I heard substance use education mentioned as service for youth in the Longmont program. Are youth also provided outpatient opioid use disorder medication options as part of the suite of services following a diagnosis from a qualified medical professional? So that sounds like that's for you, Aiden.
Yeah, so a mandatory arrest is anything where they have to arrest them and book them. So like a DUI is an example of that. that assault with a deadly weapon, again, an example of that. Anything where they have to go and get booked into jail and have their mugshot taken. And then, yeah, we provide substance education. However, we don't currently provide any like more intensive treatment that is provided on that kind of like post file with the diversion in court, because those cases might be a little more intensive. So we see a lot of like marijuana charges, some of those low level drugs, but like those higher level drugs like meth, fentanyl, that kind of stuff is going to most likely be disqualifier from our program. Though some of those could be mandatory arrests depending on the substance and the amount.
So we are re-promoting Councilor Villarreal to this. Other questions or comments from panel members for our panelists? Right on time, Councilor Villarreal. Do you have any questions for our panelists?
Did you just ask me?
You
I
always
just-
do, so I figured.
I was like, I just heard a little piece of it. So sorry, for some reason the power went off at my home and then I have to re-engage here. So I don't know if I missed any other questions that I thought I had or that other people had that were similar to mine, but I think I was interested in those interventions. Well, first, let me thank the panelists for your expertise. It's really important to hear the different levels of programming and how they're embedded into community, and how they actually are community-based responses. I really appreciate that. I think what I'm interested in, there's a lot of things swirling in my head, like how does this work for the city of Santa Fe? What are we doing now that works or is not working? And I really can't answer that. I think there's community members and the new staff that we have that is really supposed to engage in this area. I think it was Aiden that talked about the interventions that you provide, and maybe you could repeat those because I missed them as you were talking about them. Did you say theater was one piece, a theater program, or did I miss?
Yeah, we do provide a restorative theater program to youth. It's more directed at some of the younger youth that we get, or youth that are having trouble with like figuring out what safe accountability can look like. So that is really modeled in a way for kids who need to move around while they learn, as well as kids who are, maybe having trouble with taking accountability for their actions. So we don't want to throw them right into the that's like our lowest level, because everything in restorative justice is trying to bring us closer to being able to hold ourselves accountable. And that's the lowest level one, where it's like, okay, like let's give you the opportunity to like move around, do meditative exercises to get your creative juices flowing and be able to really use your voice in a group around your peers and talking about what your experience was and what you can hold yourself accountable for in a way that's like, okay, and then that means we're going to contract you in these ways. It's just, okay, we're bringing you here to share and like make that feel better and safer for you.
I guess I was imagining it as like theater of the oppressed model. I don't know if that's really how you structure it or if you've heard about that.
No, yeah, I'm not completely familiar. It's more like theater games. They don't have to like present or like put on a performance at the end.
Got it. Thank you. And then you said a reintegration contract?
Yeah.
And
So
then there was one other third one that you listed or you said that I didn't catch.
Yeah, so the reintegration contracting is for kids who have either been like suspended or they're coming back to their family system, or just giving them tools to, after you completed whatever interventions that you needed to complete, now that you're kind of returning and, leaving our care, we just give them some contract items so that will help them have a conversation with them and figure out what they need and what would help to suit them and whatever community they're returning to. So that's a smooth sort of, handoff back.
Good.
And then, so maybe it was restorative conversation training.
I think so.
Yeah, so yeah, restorative conversations is kind of one of the basis of restorative justice, where it's how do we have conversations about conflict? How do we come to agreements? How do we express our needs in a way that's not going to further or escalate a conflict, and just giving those tools to students so they know how to express themselves and to have their needs met, and how to maybe contracting in some agreements between two people who are in conflict. So that would be a great example of a way that that can be preventative, where resource officers can like notice a conflict that may escalate into an offense but isn't there yet, and then can let us know and bring us in to try and have a restorative conversation before it needs to becomes into a fight or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah. I think those kind of tools would be helpful for anybody, actually.
Right. Yeah.
Elected officials, nonprofit partners. There's quite a few ways that I think we could utilize that, conflict resolution, how people can actually have their needs met, but also like hear from others about what they're experiencing. I don't know if we got all the questions, because I was off for a bit, but Sophie had questions. Were those all answered that came in through the Q&A?
We read them and they were answered, but I know Mary Louise has her hand up.
Great.
So.
Thank you.
Hi. First, I would just want to give you guys a shout out for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise. I have a couple of questions. I do restorative justice for the Santa Fe Public Schools, and there's 3 of us. And I'm just curious as to what kind of referrals do you get that are outside of the school? I know that you did talk about marijuana use. Could you share what other referrals that you might get? And then my second part is one of the things that I've noticed has been really helpful in our district is a re-entry for students that are referred to my program. So I'm located at one school, but I work at all of the high schools. I have a middle school restorative justice coordinator that works in all the middle schools, and then an elementary one. And so I'm curious, number one, what kind of referrals do you get? And how, after you do the restorative justice facilitation, after you do the healing circle, whatever it is that they're involved in, do you do a re-entry back into the school so that those people that have referred cases can celebrate their work? Can you share a little bit of that with me?
Sure, thanks for your question, Mary Louise. I can start. So we will take any and all cases other than DV, any traffic offenses, or if someone has a warrant. So the cases for both youth and adults, the cases that we've seen are anywhere from assault, shoplifting, possession of paraphernalia, menacing, false reporting, injury or destroy property, graffiti, theft, harassment, disorderly conduct. Like it's a wide range. And then as far as your question about reintegration, we don't provide that simply because we partner with the schools. And so we invite a school participant to be a part of our conference. And so more than likely that school perspective and voice is part of the conversation. But we also, because we're a court program, our assumption is that the school has done everything that they can on a restorative end to work with this kiddo around what's needed for them. And so if that means a reintegration circle within the school, then we hope that that's happening. But as far as right now, the way that our program works, we don't do a reintegration circle. The school has its own process around what that looks like for them. But I will just name that I think there's a lot of room for opportunity there. So it makes me happy that you all are doing that.
Yeah, the type of referrals we get very similar to what Ames shared. And again, similar. We don't provide reintegration circles. However, we have trained our school resource officers to provide those in instances of suspension. And they can reach out to us for support when they need it, but they have those skills to hold those circles.
Any follow-up, Mary Louise?
No, thank you for sharing. I just want to share with you all, it's probably a good thought for it. I've noticed that when I bring students back to where we got the referral and they have the opportunity to talk about what they learned and what they'll do differently, that it's allowed for that relationship with who they're reporting that to now have this new relationship with this student. They know they can go to that person to ask for support in the future, so that there's, not any more hiccups, if that makes sense, that they're being proactive instead of reactive. But thanks again, everyone, for being with us tonight and again, sharing your expertise.
Thanks, Mary Louise. If panelists, committee members, counselors, if you have questions, please raise your hand. I did want, and let us know, and then that way we can wrap this up, but I did want to ask, again, we're probably going to be presenting some information at our next meeting about sort of the flow chart, particularly for youth here. And the reality is, once there's an arrest, whether it's because it's been referred by the school or outside of the school, once there's an arrest, once there's a police report, it is out of Santa Fe's hands. It's like we lose those young people to a system that we really have no control over, and that's the juvenile probation division of CYFD, which is state run, obviously. And we may also lose it to the DA and whatever programs they may or may not have, diversionary programs. And the reality is we just don't have that infrastructure in Santa Fe. And we have to, we have a great RJ program in the schools and a real commitment within the schools. But if there is an arrest, the schools don't get control, lose control of that kid too. And then the city does. And so it's a tall order, but we have to build something basically from scratch in our city and rebuild something. And so my question for those of you who have built things from scratch, it feels so overwhelming when you don't have the nonprofit, when you don't have the practitioners, when you don't have the volunteers, and when you may not have law enforcement even understanding that this is a possibility. And one of the reasons why we have community members is that in our past focus groups with the MDS or the Municipal Drug Strategy Task Force, people were really articulating a desire for alternatives, a desire for restorative justice-like programs, but we just don't have the vocabulary because it's not like we're seeing these programs being uplifted or elevated or promoted in the news or in our communities. And so I wrap this up, my part, with what does it take? What did it take to build this program from scratch, Ames, in your community of 35,000? Aiden, I know that Longmont, the partnership, has had just this long trajectory of building a culture that now allows for all youth to be diverted, or most youth to be diverted, and that took years. But we don't feel like we have years. So what advice do you have for us about how to build that from basically scratch? That's a big question, but please tackle it. And of course, Adam.
Oh, I can share really quickly. I definitely wasn't around in Longmont 15 years ago. But I know from what I've heard that just, finding those partnerships where you can, starting to build that culture, if it's with the schools, if it's with law enforcement. I know all the work that we've been able to do, and it's a little bit different being an independent nonprofit, has been based on the ability to really have close allies within law enforcement that have championed our work, and with probation as well. And one of the biggest things was just getting people into circles, letting people see the work, and letting that speak for itself. And you'd have a lot of the times when we're just starting and just getting officers into circles, and when they see it, they're like, oh, wait a second, this isn't like that kumbaya or whatever I thought it was. Like, this is really effective, and you are still holding them accountable, and like wow, like that was an amazing experience. But yeah, it's definitely a tall order. And it's taken us a very long time, certainly.
I'll just add a few bits. First of all, you have tremendous resources. You have what seems to be some amazing city infrastructure, whether it's the mayor, or city councilors, or the folks here who are present in this, and probably many others, and the nonprofits who are present. And that's the raw material of something very exciting. It sounds like you want to do a lot and you're trying to figure out how to get started. And I would say do both at the same time. When I started planning a project called the Red Hook Community Justice Center, it was literally a physical, moving the courthouse physically from the big centralized courthouse to a low income, at the time, high crime community, primarily people of color in Brooklyn. And we knew it was going to take several years to actually physically build the project, to renovate an old parochial school into this courthouse, and also to build the program. And so while we were doing that, we used that time to create some other projects that could start to deliver and change culture. So for instance, at that time, we were able to create an AmeriCorps program that had 50 community members participating in it. You know, that may not be an option now, but that was because we knew we could deliver something and start a community conversation. We created a youth court program, which in some ways has now morphed into something more similar to what Aiden and Ames are talking about in our work in New York, in the work of CCI in New York City, more restorative focused. But it was a program that engaged young people in the business of doing justice and helping keep their community safe. And again, now it's much more restorative and focused, but it was delivering something as quickly as we could to start to change the dialogue and to start to change the culture. Meanwhile, we had a bigger vision, a much bigger vision. But by getting a few things started and also knowing where we wanted to go, I think that was an important recipe for success. So people felt like our programming had been going on for several years when the actual core program, the Red Hook Community Justice Center, heard its first case. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say strategically. I'm sure you're aware of these things, but I do want to affirm that is a recipe, that can be a recipe for success. Deliver quickly, but also, keep an eye on where you want to go.
Yeah, I echo Adam what you're sharing, as well as Aiden. I think I would just add that, and this is what I really love about restorative justice, it's not out there. It's actually our own work, right? It's the invitation to do the work ourselves. And so the more that we, as people who want to build and see these programs thrive and grow, and we know that it works, if we're not doing the work ourselves, it's just one more thing in the to-do box, right? And so it's really about that culture change internally for ourselves, the way that we engage with each other, the way that we hold meetings together. How do we understand it in our own lives in a way that then the work we're doing is restorative as we're building these programs and integrating and engaging in community, that people feel a difference, right? People know it when they're participating in something that feels different, that's countercultural, different narrative, it feels different. And so that's where I think when we can practice that ourselves and then with each other, that's how people see, oh, this isn't just one more thing that now I have to do because someone said I have to do. I actually feel better in engaging in this way. And so again, I'll echo all of the things that were shared, but also starting from our own selves and how we engage and participate together, I think is really, really key as well.
Well, we really appreciate all of you for sharing this. This is a continued conversation. We are really interested in bringing our city along in these conversations with us, which is why we have an interpreter and why we had this via webinar and sent this out widely. We did have a lot of folks on today's call. So thank you all, and we're going to move forward. I again want to acknowledge our organizers here at Somos who are, and all of the folks in the community, many on this call, who are getting people to do the surveys with Dr. Gabriel Sanchez, as well as doing the focus groups. And so let's just keep doing these focus groups. And there we are at Somos in our conference center. So everyone, please say hi to the folks at Somos Un Pueblo Unido who are listening to all of this. And thank you, Ana Martinez, for putting this all together and making it run so smoothly for us. So with that, we are done for our part. And I will give it back to Councilor Villarreal and Councilor Rivera.
Well, thank you, Marcela, for setting this up. It was a great, clearly we went a little over what we normally do, but it was great conversation, great questions. So I don't think there's any problem with that. So appreciate you putting this together. And the next thing we have is matters from the task force, if there's anything from task force members. I don't see any hands or any questions. Gina, been pretty dapper tonight, I must say. So with that, our next meeting is Tuesday, May 16th. Unless there's anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks for our guests.
Adios.
Thank you.
Right.